Hello and welcome to the UK Column. Today I am joined by Malcolm Hill, a UK Column member who's been following the UK Column's work, I believe, since 2019. Malcolm, and you are working UK based but living in Russia. Just give us a little background on why you got involved with the UK Column and why you're living in Russia.
Hi, thanks for the invitation to come on. Got involved with the column, started watching it. I was already looking at various channels and following people, and I can't remember how I came across you, to be honest, to start with, but it seemed you were saying the right things, and started following you on a fairly regular basis. And then when COVID came, that became a permanent thing, essential viewing.
What took you to live in Russia in the first place?
Well, my wife's Russian, and we lived over here for several years in London and in Wales, and then fancied a change, was starting to dislike the UK more and more in terms of being here. And it seemed the next logical step to try living there. We thought we'd give it a go, see if I liked it or not. And I seemed to fit right in. So we're settled, happy, and we stayed there.
What I'd like to do is to discuss why you fit right in, because this is something a lot of people in the UK have no understanding of Russia, no understanding of China. Today we're talking about Russia. Mm-hmm. It's understandable that we don't, because many of us have grown up believing that Russia is the great enemy, whether that be because we're old enough to have lived through the Cold War or the end of the Cold War, or because we've listened, if we're younger, listened to the propaganda that we've been bombarded with over the last 20 years or so. So Russia is perceived as being the great enemy. How have you found it? What are the people like actually when you meet them day to day? And I suppose what is really would be of interest is what's their view of the world? Are they optimistic or pessimistic about the future?
Oh, good questions. How I find them when I first got there, and how I find them still to this day: warm, open, friendly, incredibly receptive. I've never had any issues or problems at all. Everybody knows I'm English because I walk around and speak English. I converse in English with my wife when we're out. Quite often get people come up and ask where I'm from, what I'm doing there, and that sort of thing. Genuine interest. They sometimes seem a bit disbelieving that I'm there and why would I be there, because from social media and from particularly the younger generations, they're up to sort of mid-20s, who didn't live perhaps through some of the harder times. They're obsessed with the West and how great it seems to be and how great it's portrayed. But a short conversation seems to put them right on that score. How they view the world, they themselves realistically positive. Life's been getting better continuously there since the beginning of the 2000s. It was a slow progression to start with, but certainly in the last 10 years, that's accelerated. Everybody's better off. Everybody's got a more comfortable standard of living. And the future looks bright.
So everyone's better off. Is that including in the last 2 or 3 years since the West has been imposing sanctions?
Especially in the last 2 or 3 years. There's an awful lot of industry that's come back. There's more employment. There's a lot more money floating around.
So this is quite contrary to the narrative that we're presented, because we're being told that sanctions are really hitting the Russian economy hard, and life is getting harder for Russians every day.
Yes, I see that because I do follow Western news to an extent, just to keep a finger on the pulse. But no, the truth is that where a lot of industry was taken away in the 1990s and shipped abroad, certainly lots of profits from industry and from resources were taken away in the 90s, and they all disappeared abroad. They've been coming back gradually since then, since the early 2000s. But in the last, not just the last 2-3 years, because sanctions against Russia started around 2014. So they've developed over the last 10 years. Industry has come back. The economy has improved. It grew very well last year. Everybody's happy.
And so what is the attitude amongst ordinary people in St. Petersburg to what's going on in Ukraine then?
The attitude is the same as it was at the start of the problems. It's a shame it's happening. Nobody wants it to happen, but they understand that if the security of Russia and the Russian border isn't resolved, then it's a problem that's never going to go away. It does need fixing one way or the other, preferably through negotiation and through peaceful talk. That didn't seem to work. So they want the conflict to end. Of course they do. But they understand at the moment, for Russian security, it's necessary until a better alternative presents itself, which is the ideal solution.
So they're generally supportive of the action that the Russian government has taken. Would that be a fair thing to say?
Yes, very supportive, and more supportive as time has gone on.
Right. And so what's their view of NATO and the West then?
Much as you'd probably imagine. What's NATO doing? Better perhaps, rather than having a view. A lot of Russians day to day on the street don't have a particular world view of politics and what's going on in the greater world. As a nation, it's just, why can't we live in peace? Why don't you just leave us alone?
That's pretty clear then. Yeah. And what about their attitude towards China, the so-called global South, BRICS, and this kind of initiative?
The more trade and international trade, the better. Why can't we trade more? Why can't we get on? What's the problem with the wars and issues that we don't need, whether that's coming from the West or from anywhere else? The world's a big place. There's room for everybody. Trade is good. Travel is good. And integration with other nations is good. Russia's got so many different ethnicities and a lot of immigration from foreign countries, and everybody rubs along fairly well.
So you've brought up the issue of immigration. That they do have an immigration situation, do they? Or is it not perceived as being a negative thing?
There's been a clampdown, or starting to be a clampdown, on illegal immigration. Immigration per se is absolutely fine. It's welcome. The population of Russia is not growing fast. In fact, it's been declining fairly over the last few years. So immigration is a good thing. It's seen as a positive thing. But there is elements of illegal immigration which they are trying to clamp down on, because that's where there are more complicated social issues involved with that.
And is there a significant English-speaking community in Russia then?
Yes. There's not a massive community where everybody gets together and has gatherings and that sort of thing, but there is a growing number of people, of English-speaking people, who are emigrating out there. I'm in touch and at the moment with about 30 people in the UK who are in the process of moving out there in the next year or two. There's a new, if we want to talk about it, we can get onto that. There's a new Russian visa that's been launched end of last year to make it very easy for people from a large number of countries, predominantly Western, to emigrate if they wish to.
Let's talk about that. I mean, obviously, without giving away any personal information, what would be the motivation that the people are going there? What's their motivation for doing that?
Similar to mine, a disillusionment with the UK. Also, there's a fairly large contingent from America and Canada as well. It's not just from the UK. But disillusionment with the UK, with the cultural values, with the social values, and the way things are changing on that basis. The new visa program that was introduced is called the Shared Values Visa, and essentially is on the basis that you state that you disagree with the imposed ideological views of your current nation that contradict Russian spiritual and moral values. And on that basis, that's basically all you need to do to apply and get what will turn out to be a 3-year temporary residency.
And what would be the expectations from the Russian government about your ability to survive financially and so on?
Work is your own problem. It does give you, it does have permission to work, so you're free to work there. It's a 3-year temporary residency, and at the end of that, if you wish to settle, you would need to then pass a Russian language exam as per other methods of gaining permanent residency. But essentially, it's a very, very quick way to get across to move over there, move to any part of the country you wish to settle, work and start to make a life for yourself if that's what you want to do.
But there's no particular support if you do that. You absolutely have to stand on your own 2 feet.
Yes, there's no financial support for that, but it's designed as an opportunity for people who don't share their own country's moral values, shall we say, and would like to raise their children perhaps elsewhere, or just to themselves live in somewhere that's more welcoming to their views of life.
One of the criticisms of Russia and China is that they are simply the other side of the same coin, that they're building technocracy in the same way that we are in the West, that AI and CBDC and digital ID and these types of things are just around the corner as much there as they are here. What's your perception of that?
Yes, that's definitely happening. I'm not a fan of those things. Having said that, a lot of it will come down to how it's implemented and how it's used or abused. I think it's inevitable wherever you're going to be in the world, the technology is coming. In terms of identification, there's always been more of that out there anyway. It's very natural the Russians have an internal passport, shall we say, which they use for identification for things. And what will happen is a digital version of that, but you need that anyway to open a bank account or to go to do government services or a lot of other things. You need your ID with you anyway, but that's just always been a part of the Russian culture from the year dot. So that's not seen as a threat in the same way. I'm sort of generally anti that sort of thing, but I think it's going to be eventually end up wherever you are in the world, inevitable to an extent. But how they implement, say, a digital currency and the way they use it or abuse it is more the issue for me.
But they are not generally looking at that in the same negative light as people in the West might.
For the normal person, no. It's just it is what it is. If it happens, that's what happens, and that's the way it is now. They're very, although they have a good understanding of what's going on in the world and how things are and how different countries are acting positively or negatively against the country, they're sort of slightly disassociated from politics in the sense that, well, there's a government, it's their job to run the country, it's their job to do that. My job is to get on with my life. And what the government does doesn't impact me particularly greatly. So that's sort of the general attitude of them. They're aware of what's going on. They're not particularly engaged in a political way, apart from a younger subset of people. And again, it's those that largely have been caught up in the social media campaigns who are far more vociferous about their political views.
What kind of opposition is allowed in Russia? What kind of freedom of speech is there? Do people speak out against Putin and the government?
Absolutely. There's a little bit more constraint at the moment because the country is in a war situation. So there are a few things that you can't go out and campaign against, which is general, I think, in most countries that are on a war footing, shall we say. But generally speaking, freedom of speech is fine. I've probably got a lot more freedom to say and speak my opinions there than I have in the UK. I'm not going to get arrested for saying the wrong thing. There are arrests, and in St. Petersburg, you see them from time to time, but usually it's where protests have gone into certain parts of the city. You can't protest. For example, in the same way in the UK, you can't just turn up and have an unagreed march on Parliament Square, or there's certain parts of the city centre where you can't just go around. And then people do that, and they do it quite deliberately because then they get arrested, and then it makes good visuals.
So, but there is an opposition.
Yes, there is an opposition. It's not constrained in its ability to present itself. I don't know how many political parties, because I don't engage particularly at that amount of that sort of politics in Russia. But there are several political parties. They all do rather well. Some do better than others. The second, in the last few elections, the second most popular party is still the Communist Party. that varies between sort of 10 and 15% of the vote usually. Apart from the last election, it was reduced because the support for Putin grew dramatically during the first couple of years of the military goings on.
Is there an awareness in Russia, in the general population, of, some of the big anti-Russia stories that we've seen in the West, like Skripal or Navalny or or Litvinenko, any of these kinds of allegations that are made against the Russian state of attacking the West?
Yes, they're aware of it, and they mostly sort of dismiss it out of hand as nonsense, is the short answer.
And what about the likes of Dugan and the killing of his daughter? Is the West blamed for that?
Very much so. Yes, that was a major event, and was seen with fairly outwardly expressed disgust by most people. It was a very sad event, very unnecessary, but yes, a Western attack.
So that was viewed as a Western attack as opposed to a Ukrainian attack?
Yes, because they have a good understanding that Ukraine is sort of the piggy in the middle, and not the ultimate cause of the issues. Quite a lot of people will look to what's happening in Ukraine and say, well, yeah, that's down to America, or that's down to the UK. At the end of the day.
So they've got good awareness there. Let's talk about the media in general. Is Russia Today have a presence in Russia, or is it mainly media? Is that Russian media being exported to other countries?
It's both. I don't watch, in the same way I don't watch much UK mainstream stuff. I don't watch particularly any or much Russian mainstream stuff.
Is RT viewed as being mainstream then?
Well, yes, I mean there is Russian language RT, and then they do export in the various other languages. But yeah, it's reasonably mainstream. There are a few proper state sponsored channels, shall we say, that have a variety of programs on. I tend not to watch any of those, as I say, in the same way that I wouldn't watch the BBC. Although, for the same reasons, is that all programming like that is going to be biased to an extent. Although what I would say is that when I do watch those sort of political programs and discussions on the state channels, the alignment, although in favour of Russia and biased, yes, without a doubt, the reporting of the news and the discussions centred around it are more similar to what I pick up from independent media in the West. So the points of view will be very similar to, say, Conversational UK column or a number of other independent media channels in the West. Perhaps more with a little bit of favour towards Russia, but far more balanced than I would get from a BBC or CNN or Fox or whatever in the West.
Are you saying that they would actually attempt to hold the Russian state to account?
Within a yes, not as much as you want them to. No, but yeah, there are conversations that happen on. There's a program on every morning where they discuss the news of the day. It goes on for about 2 hours. There's a panel who stand around talking about it, and there's voices of dissent on there, and they have arguments and disagreements. So there are presentations of the views. The Russian state political view will usually win out in the end, but there are alternative views expressed on the TV on a more or less daily basis for people to watch, observe, think about, and decide what they think.
Malcolm, there's a story about a Christmas tree and people meeting Putin. What's the score with that?
In Moscow, there's a Christmas tree they have every year, and people are invited to go and hang wishes on it. And Putin is directly involved in that. And not this Christmas, the one before, a little girl hung her wish on the tree, and her wish was to meet Putin. And that's exactly what happened. He arranged that and turned up and presented her with a little bouquet of flowers and had a nice chat with her. This little 4-year-old girl, I think she was.
Did he do that kind of privately, or did that become a PR exercise?
It was televised, but the event is usually televised anyway. because there's various things going on there, and it's kind of like not a charity, but it's various people will put, particularly young children, will be putting wishes on the tree, and then a number of them are made to happen. This one obviously got a bit more coverage perhaps than usual, but it is a fairly well-known event anyway.
In terms of sort of day-to-day life, then, what's the situation with transport, with supermarkets, with just ordinary day-to-day stuff? Does that all function, or is that like the UK or Europe with trains not running on time, breaking down, signalling not working, this kind of thing?
It functions better. I do understand I live in one of the larger cities, much bigger than Birmingham, not quite as big as London, and Moscow again is obviously huge as well. But in there, the transportation works. There's trams, metros, normal buses, and the usual forms of transport, and they all function very, very well.
Even in the winter?
Even in the winter, yes.
Well, this is it, because obviously St. Petersburg and Moscow will have proper winters with proper below zero temperatures and proper snow. So, I presume you still have proper snow, but it still all functions.
Yes, yeah. Global warming means that our winters only get down to about -30 now on a cold day, but average at around -10 to -15. But yeah. All the public transport still works perfectly fine. The trains are still running. Obviously, the metro still runs, but the buses and the trams and everything else still go. They're geared up for the weather, and they're used to it. It's just life just carries on. And in terms of just everyday life, as you were asking earlier, it's very similar. There's plenty of shops. There's plenty of food. I haven't starved yet. Through lack of food being supplied on the shelves and that sort of. In fact, there's too much, if anything. It's generally the food is cheaper. It's generally of a better quality because there is fruit and vegetables, for example, coming in from all over the countries surrounding Russia on the southern side, particularly. So, pick one example: tomatoes. Is not just those tasteless, watery Spanish tomatoes that you can get in the UK. There's 6 or 8 varieties of tomato. They're all different. They all have different flavours, different qualities. And the quality of food generally is of a higher standard. And the same then extends to meat and fish. And it's bountiful, it's plentiful, and it's much more reasonably priced.
And what about healthcare?
Healthcare is excellent. I've not had much use for it myself. It's free for citizens. I have to pay. I've used a doctor once where I had an issue with my eye, and I went to the local doctor, and they said, "Well, come back in an hour," because they have a optician basically attached to the clinic. Although they have a GP clinic, they tend to have specialists attached anyway. So there's a dermatologist that will work in the clinic, there's an optician that works in the clinic. I went back an hour later, had my issue resolved. I had something in my eye which he had to take out. Gave me an eye test, gave me some medical treatment, and the whole thing with the appointment was about £16.
No waiting for an appointment?
Yeah, I had to wait an hour because she didn't start work till an hour after I've turned up there. My wife, a couple of winters ago needed an X-ray. She went to her doctor about a back issue. They said, "Well, let's just get an X-ray and check it out." And they didn't have an X-ray there. They said, "Go to the next clinic down the road." So it was about a 10-minute walk to the next doctor's clinic, who did have an X-ray machine. And she went in and said, "I need an X-ray. Blah blah blah. Hopefully, is it any chance you could see me like in the next week? Because it's quite painful." And the receptionist just looked at her and said, "No." Said, "We can see you now." So she went straight through. She was X-rayed within 30 minutes. The results supplied the next morning, which she took back to her doctor, and treatment was dealt with.
Why do you think it is that their system seems to function? And I guarantee that they're not putting anywhere near the amount of money into it that we are in Britain.
There's probably a long answer, but the short answer is it's run by the state. And yes, there are issues, as with any state-run organisation, without doubt. But there's a lot of accountability as well. If there's any service that you're not happy about, there are direct ways to complain that goes quite high up the chain quite quickly. So if you have an issue with your medical board, or you suspect there's been misappropriation of funds, which does happen time to time, as with any, you know, any society, there's ways to report it fairly quickly, and they tend to get dealt with. And if they do find any sort of corruption or misappropriation of or wastage of funds, they get dealt with fairly severely, and it doesn't happen so often.
I suppose the measure of any state and any government is what happens when it's under stress of some kind. And you mentioned earlier the fact that Russia is currently on a war footing, although by the sound of things, that hasn't resulted in massively stringent emergency powers being used. But what was the situation during COVID?
I wasn't there during COVID. My wife was. There was a injection campaign. It was not mandatory for anybody, and most people didn't bother with it. Russians generally are fairly self-aware of their health. They have a better education or better understanding, perhaps, of their own health. So there's more treatments, for example, you can buy over the counter than you can here without prescription, because it doesn't get abused in the same way. Generally speaking, they have a better understanding of what their body needs, and if they need something, they'll go and get it. If they don't need it, they don't. But they do understand that good diet is important, and most of them eat a far better diet than I was having in the UK, for example. But during COVID, so there was an injection. It wasn't mRNA based. I don't know more than a couple of people out of a circle of 40 so people that I know. I think only maybe one or two of them bothered getting it. Most didn't bother. This is an interesting conflict out there. It's one thing to have government rules and regulations on anything, any aspect of life out there. It's another for the people to actually follow it. So when my wife was there was a sign went up outside one day, and someone came around knocking on the door saying there's a case of COVID on this floor has been identified. Nobody can leave their flats for a week. And they put up signs and they put up some tape to say to people, you must stay indoors, you must stay at home for the next week, blah, blah, blah. And within 30 minutes of that being done, someone had come out, ripped down all the signs, taken all the tape down, someone else that lived them, and that's it. And then life just carried on as normal. You can make rules and regulations, but you can't tell Russians how to live their life. They will just do what they want to do anyway, which is, I find, very refreshing.
It is indeed. And of course, again, completely contrary to the idea that we may have of the Russian state, which is that, that there would be quite a strong crackdown on that type of behavior.
I can also happy to confirm I've never been interviewed or followed by anyone from the KGB, well, FSB now. I don't have anyone spying on me or following me door to door to see what I'm up to each day.
Is there an idea in Russia of, foreign agents? I mean, for example, in the United States and the United Kingdom, we have this legislation which requires you to register if you're perceived as being some kind of mouthpiece for a foreign government, or for example, people that are working for Press TV or Russia Today are now required to register as being foreign influencers effectively. Is that a thing?
Yes, there is a requirement there that came in. I'm hazy on those details. I don't know any nitty gritty about that, but there is a requirement that came in, I think, a few years ago of a similar nature, that if you're funded from a foreign organisation, then it has to be declared. That's something that's fairly recent in the last couple of years, as I recall. But it's similar fashion is there.
And do you know what the consequences are of registering that?
I don't know. I think the consequences are you have to register so that people are aware. I don't think there's a restriction on you necessarily that I'm aware of, but it's not something I know a great deal about.
You're presenting an idea of a country that is functioning better than many Western countries, that has better quality food than most Western countries, better healthcare than most Western countries and a better attitude towards their government than perhaps many people have in Western countries. What are the downsides to living there?
Yes, there's downsides. One is a result of the current situation, which is not that easy to get directly in and out of the country, depending on where you're wanting to fly to. And likewise, a transfer of money across the border is tricky. But that's just because of the current situation, although that is going to stay long term. I don't see sanctions being lifted anytime soon. Things they're not particularly good at is road planning and road building. They're fairly appalling at. And there is still corruption in the country. It tends to be mostly private. So there might be for example, there's a building near us, for example, a block of flats that went up a few years ago. It got half built. The flats got sold, and then the people running the business fled to London with all the money. And those situations do get sorted out, but there's a long procedure to do that. Eventually, the government will take over the building. They'll finish building it, and then people will get the properties that they paid for. So there's that sort of corruption at the local level does go on. It's those sort of things that could be improved. But yeah, they're terrible at building roads. They'll build them, and then 6 months later they'll need filling in again. Having said that, from where I grew up in Kent, the roads are better than there.
What about the railways? Are they better at building railways?
They're much better at building railways. There's good high-speed links, and they're just starting to build another high-speed link between St. Petersburg and Moscow, which will go into operation in a few years. They started it, I think, last year. Can't remember exactly, but within sort of 5-6 years, it will be certainly testing and probably getting nearly operational. And then they'll be running services that take about 2 to 2.5 hours instead of the current 3.5 to 4 hours to get from St. Petersburg to Moscow. And they'll eventually be running those trains every 15 minutes. It's a few hundred miles. And the current high-speed train takes about 3.5 hours.
When you say high speed, what do you mean by that?
Oh, it's around about 150 off the top of my head.
Yeah,
150, 160. It's not the 80, 90 miles an hour high speed.
No, I was just wondering, was China about 230 or something at the moment, miles an hour? So 350 kilometers an hour, whatever that is. I'm just wondering if they're beginning to compete.
The current system, no, it's not at that level. I don't know what the new one's going to be, but they're building a new track specifically for a faster train. It probably won't be as good as China's, let's face it, but it will be a significant improvement on the current system.
Yes.
And they're also developing it because of the sanction situation. They're also having to develop it now using their own technology and developing their own technology as opposed to using overseas technology in many cases. Another example of that is at the moment they're just doing final testing flights of the first commercial jet liner that Russia's built, where everything is from within Russia, using no external resources or anything. So it's been designed, developed and built purely using Russian resources from everything within the country. And that will go into production, I think, next year to replace all the Boeings that they're currently relying on for air travel.
Yes, because it's interesting because I noticed that China is using Boeing and Airbus, but they're using a lot of Boeing aircraft, and China has just recently decided to suspend the delivery of a whole batch of new Boeing aircraft that we're expecting to get because of the tariff situation. But spare parts are going to be subject to tariff problems as well. So I just wonder, it is interesting that countries are starting to look at their own industry again.
Yes, I don't know whether China could get some spare parts from Russia for their Boeings. Spare parts were part of the sanctions from the beginning, so they've had to, again, it's another aspect of industry, they've had to develop their own.
It is a fascinating country, and I'm interested that you are aware of people that are planning on emigrating, and what kind of timescales are they sort of looking at for that?
There's a couple that have already gone. This is a group of that I'm in touch with about 30, and we try and meet up when we can get together from time to time as well to have physically meet as opposed to just communicate via phones. But there's a couple who are coming out for a few weeks later this year for a holiday to visit the area they wish to move to, but they're planning on moving fairly soon after that. There's another couple with a young family who are gearing up to move next summer. And then others at various stages. It can take a while to pack up your life and then ship everything abroad. And there's complications with applications and the humdrum of paperwork and all that sort of thing. So it's not something that happens overnight.
Are these all people that have taken inspiration from you, or have you just got to know them because, or in fact, how have you got to know them?
I've got to know them completely the opposite. They were inspired to go, and then I got in touch just through comments on a social media Telegram chat. Got to know one person, and then in that group, and then said, "Well, come along and join. It would be interesting to have your experience because you're already on the other side." And so got to know them that way, and happy to help out where I can. I'm happy to have a conversation like this because although Russia is far from perfect, it's more perfect than a lot of other places to live. So my campaign, if anything, is just to try and open a window on Russia, try and help people understand it a bit better than it was, and encourage people to come and visit at least for yourself, because you can still get a tourist visa, you can still come over and have a great holiday. I'm quite happy to act as a tour guide if you're in the St. Petersburg area, but just to try and open up people's minds a bit to help them understand that Russia isn't how it's perceived, but it's just a normal country full of normal people who happen to live in a different country, speak a different language, and live under a political system that is in disagreement with their political system. But at the end of the day, people are people. To sum it up best, my son, one of my sons came out a couple of years ago for a visit, and I said, just form your own opinion, go back and tell everybody whatever you think, whatever your honest opinion of the country is, whether you love it, hate it, whatever you found. And I said to him at the end, I said, just what's your summing up? What do you think of Russia? And his first response was, it's just so normal. And that's it. It's a country full of normal people living their normal lives,
or trying to, and probably succeeding a lot better than we are. Well, you paint a generally optimistic view of it. You're living there most of the time, so you clearly do enjoy it. These people we should not be viewing as our enemy.
100%. Yeah, they're not our enemy. The enemy is as with most places, the enemy is your own political class, for want of a better expression.
Well, Malcolm, we'll leave it there for today. Thank you very much. It's been a fascinating conversation. If anybody is inspired by this to move, how would they contact you if they wanted to?
Easiest way to contact me, I've got a very small Telegram channel where I occasionally post day-to-day life. It's called An Englishman Abroad, and you can get in touch with me through that.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. And hopefully you'll get a few more subscribers to that channel in the not too distant future. So thank you for joining me.
Thank you.